this is where it's at. It's not going back. We're not getting rid of the transfer portal. We're not getting rid of the money. Are there ways we could tweak it to make it better and more palatable for everyone involved? Probably so. I don't know if I'm smart enough to figure that part out. Hopefully there are people out there that can. But I know the one thing that really needs to be changed is where we sit with the deadlines on everything and the dates. And I think everyone can kind of agree that portal opening while teams are in the playoff is just it's insanity. I mean, you wouldn't have free agency in the middle of the NFL playoffs.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. That's right. Get out your hats. It's signing day. Who are you signing with today? I'm Yogi Roth, of course, always joined by Jim Thornby. We will be joined by one of our favorite former walk-ons, turned scholarship, receivers, turned elite NFL and college broadcaster, Rhett Lewis, to talk all things deep dive into the Big Ten championship game. But before that, Jim, you've chosen your hat. You've chosen the CFP hat on signing day. Mario is not happy with you. Who else is not happy? I mean, right now,
the
lane is Greg Sankey's not happy with you. I mean, there's
look
out.
A lot of ADs.
You got to just slow roll, stay focused. Okay. Do not disturb on your phone. Just don't worry about anybody. Okay. Just send in the fax. We don't do faxes anymore. We know the deal, but it is signing day. I do have a thought on signing day, and I want to hear from you. I do believe, and we tweeted this out earlier on signing day here on a Wednesday. It is a crazy time in college football. It is an annoying time. You may have felt my passion in the previous episode. Thank you for indulging all of us in that. But for those 18 and 17-year-old young men who are signing their letter of intent, or their financial aid agreement, because there is no longer a letter of intent on a Wednesday, congratulations. I made a lot of them at the Elite 11 Academy, which is for kids in junior high. And their dream is to have this day and sit at a table like we're sitting at now with their family on both sides and choose the hat that they want to choose and then achieve a dream. So I just want to say, in the chaotic, often cloudy, dark era that we sometimes sit in college football, congratulations. It is a beautiful day, and you deserve to sit in all of that glory and all of that light. And it will change come Monday because you're going to be on campus pretty soon. But enjoy. You've worked your tail off to get to this opportunity.
Yeah, and I think, just from an analysis part of signing day, we're going to let this, this whole early signing period play out and kind of, take a step back to be able to kind of really see what happens, because I mean, the ball moves so quickly that, from A to B, whatever like that, you want to be able to get a full picture of this before really kind of, going off the cuff here. And I mean, as we've seen earlier this week, there's so much nonsense put out there that's just not true. There was, reports out there that Noah Fafita was going in the transfer portal. His dad had to come out and say, yeah, guys, it's not really true. Not to say that no one might not necessarily in the future decide that that's his best move, but as of right now, it's not. So just don't believe everything you read until you read it from an actual trusted source. If you read it and you're like, wait, who is this guy? There's probably a reason you're saying, who is this guy? Because it's probably someone who doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I hate that about the sport. And you know what's been interesting? Tetro McMillan, finalist for the Blitnikoff, by the way, just sent my final ballot in, Jim. I'll reveal my vote here at the end of the season, along with Nick Nash and Travis Hunter. And Noah Fafita have been kind of in the middle of inaccurate reporting for, you could argue, the last calendar year. And what bothers me about that, and I'm going to keep it calm today, is that the account that tweets out, he's leaving, they've left, whatever, they're getting all of this attention, and now you can get paid on different platforms like X, etc. And what bothers me is that when you want to refute it, I feel this sometimes, especially with coaching and all the coaching changes that are happening. There's a lot of reporting that to me has been inaccurate, and you're just putting gas on a fire when you do that, when you're not really sure if it's really true. And then if somebody like Jim Thornby, who is a trusted source in the media, quote tweets that and says, no, you're wrong, you're just adding more attention to it as well. So it's this dance for 100%. Those of us that want to be thoughtful. I feel that too. And I'll be like, dude, not true. They didn't fire that guy, or they're not. What you're doing now is And all of a sudden, then you're just bringing more attention to it. So it's a tough dance. I don't know where could you offer maybe some guidance?
No, you're 100% right. You fall into the trap because that's the reason that they're doing it. They're looking for that engagement to, make money off of you. So like you have to kind of just step away and like realize. And like the funny thing is, like, my first instinct is always either to text you or some other friends and say like, bro, did you see this? And then they're like, oh, wait a minute, never mind, that's not real. Like, so you're not like amplifying it on a public level so that they're getting what they want out of that, but like you're trying to be like, wait, am I crazy here? And then like someone who's going, oh no, that's obviously a fake account, like there's an extra underscore in the name or what have you, and then you feel like an idiot because you fell for the banana in the tailpipe. But yeah, it's everyone just take a deep breath when you see something online and just be like, okay, who's actually saying this? Does it make sense? Now let's see until like the school actually says X, Y, or Z, or the player actually says X, Y, or Z, like take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. So to that point, just let's put a bow on signing day, so everybody knows the reality of signing day, because I think it's a little different this year. There is no national letter of intent that you're going to sign. That used to be a binding agreement with the school once you sent it in. Now you're signing a financial aid agreement with the school, not the collective. You're doing it with the school. The school now can be involved in those things. So when you sign that, you also are not completely bound to that school. That is the interesting part about signing day this year. For instance, Jim Thornby can come sign with the Paris Musketeers of the Pacific whatever conference that we want to be, and it means nothing. That is really the sad truth. Now, I've talked to enough players over the course of the last week that have seen chaos happen with the coaching staff they plan on going to. The players that do sign on Wednesday, and you can sign Thursday and Friday, it's a 3-day window, they plan on going there. So I don't think things will be crazy unless your coach leaves. If a coach leaves, kicks into a rule that now exists in college football where you have a month where the portal opens up for you. That happened. Julian Sain is a very famous example from a year ago. Signed at Alabama, was going to Alabama. Nick Saban leaves Alabama. The portal window opens for him. He finds his way now as, I would say, the presumptive starter for Ohio State next season. That's very presumptuous on my end. So we'll see how that thing shakes out by the minute, by the day. We will make sure our good friend Brandon Huffman comes in. We'll do a whole deep dive on the portal, on signing day, etc. But right now, Jim, I think I want to hear, through the lens of the West Coast, your thoughts on the CFP and the hat that you donned today on signing day.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, last night, as they like to coin it, the penultimate release.
What a word.
I love it. It's a great word. But the last Tuesday night release of the playoff rankings. And I think this is probably the first one where you can really look at it and go, okay, this is what they really think of these teams. For some of these teams, whether it be, an Indiana or Ohio State or Tennessee, they have all the data for those teams that they're going to get. Now, Ward Manuel said after the reveal, that for those teams that they're not really going to be effective. Now, I'll take him at his word for it, but also I can't also not think that the results of one of these games could influence your opinion of another team based on their history with this. And to be completely honest with you, I don't understand why they continue to do the media scrum call after the reveal, because all it does is just pigeonhole them into because all they're asking oh well, how come you use this one? So let's use the example of the Miami, Alabama, because that one seems to be the one that's the most controversial. There's also the Ohio State, Tennessee, whatever, and people will go oh, Ohio State has 2 top 10 wins. And they're like, oh, but Ohio State just lost. They all have you're just putting yourself in a hole of being well, 2 weeks ago you said this, and now you're saying this. It's just I would actually not do those calls. But anyway, let's stick to what is going on. The ACC commissioner on Tuesday night put out a statement that he was shocked and disappointed at Alabama being ahead of Miami. Now some people are oh my God, I can't, this is what commissioners do. Like you go out there and you politic, as soon as those things come out, you politic and you say, hey, no, blah, 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 blah. You have all these bullet points that your staff has been working on for you, and you go out there and you do it. Now, do I think that Alabama should be ahead of Miami? I actually do. Like when you look at it, because if you look at, the things that they're probably looking at, their record against the current top 25, Alabama 3-1, Miami 0-1. Critics will say, well, of course, because they're stacking the top 25 with SEC teams that Alabama beat. Sure. Okay, how about against winning teams? Alabama 6-1, Miami 4-2. Right? They only have one common opponent, which is South Florida, which they both smack. So that doesn't even really enter the equation. But I think when you look at what they looked at with Miami, and I think this is probably what most non-Miami or non-ACC football fans look at with this team, is like Miami got out of a lot of games this year by the skin of their teeth. Like they played 5 games that were decided by less than 7 points. They won the first 3, the Virginia Tech on the Hail Mary, the Cal on the crazy comeback, and then Louisville, which wasn't
targeting.
Yeah. It's like all that. So but then they lost those 2 to Georgia Tech and Syracuse. So I think even though they don't, they don't ding them at the time, they're like, okay, they still won that game, but that's still a lingering fact in the back of their head of like, they struggled in that game, and they kind of build it up. And then once the air comes out of that balloon, there goes their ranking, because, I think that's part of the thing with, I just think that it makes sense. Now, do they want to be consistent? And they say, oh, that's not how they did it last year. Well, it's a different committee than last year. Every year is a different committee. So you're getting different voices. They're learning from what the committee did the previous year and looking at it and going, I don't like how they did this last year. I'm going to take this into, consideration. Maybe, and obviously from going from 4 to 12 makes it a much different thing too. But I think trying to find a consistency is hard, because it's not the same people. You're not, it's not a computer. It's a group of people that is evolving each year. So I think, circling way back to the original point, I think Alabama actually does deserve to be ahead of Miami at this point.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. On the flight home last night, I was in Oregon. I was doing a feature on Dillon Gabriel. Sit down with Dan Lanning that I want to share when we talk about the Big Ten title game. I was just reading everything because I don't have a game this week to prep for, so I'm not watching film. It's kind of an amazing experience your first week when you don't have that. And I think I read everybody's take, at least at the Athletic, whoever we both really respect, on their thoughts on Miami's out, the however you say that word.
Penultimate.
There you go. Penultimate rankings. And it was really interesting. And to your point on the phone call, there's a lot of smart people in college football. There's a lot of smart people on the internet. There's crazy too, but there's arguments that you don't think about, to me, at times. And both of us have done the mock committee selection where you go to Dallas and you sit in a room and you have one of the chairs and you do the mock exercise. Now, we haven't done that, at least neither one of us have done that with 12 teams in the mock exercise, but we both did the 4. So I think we know it enough to know that you go through different examples. But I cannot imagine that here they sat on the Tuesday night of championship week and were like, nope, no, if you don't play, basically you're not moving. Because I'm with you. I think that there's a lot of smart people. They're going to be talking to every person that has a seat in that room, or they're going to be absorbing those conversations or the arguments, or to what you said, the politicking. I think there's just the human element of it. And I just go back to the same core question that we asked the great former head of the CFP, Bill Hancock. We had him on this show. We asked him about it and said, is it at the time the 4 best teams right now or the 4 best bodies of work? So when I look at Miami and Alabama and Tennessee and Ohio State, it's the same question. Because you're right. You can't look at Ohio State in their most recent game and be like, that's one of the top, what are we saying, 7 or 8 teams, right, that don't get an automatic berth. I agree with that. They did not look good. But you cannot look at that roster and look at that team and be like, they're not if not in the top 2 teams when it comes to talent. And I've said this forever, and I want to be consistent. It is not an invitational. Like just because you kill it in recruiting, just because you have a talented roster doesn't mean you get invited. And I still believe that. That's why I'm not in on a 3-loss team like Ole Miss. I just can't do it. Like I still think the games matter. And that's where I see the argument coming from the ACC versus the SEC. Like I still think there's something to the inequities of 8 conference games. Now, ACC, they still play 8 conference games, right?
Yeah.
So so you have that commonality among them. I think the South Florida thing, I heard Mario Cristobal on ACC Network. I was listening to that on my flight home. And he talked about how like middle of the third quarter, the score with them and South Florida versus Bama and South Florida were totally different worlds. Fair point, right? So we're talking about the totality of the game or of the season.
And that is their responsibility to like find that nuance.
That's right.
Because the committee members, they're assigned to a conference, and with Miami and Bama being in different conferences, they're not watching that early weeks. If they're the SEC monitors, they're not watching the Miami South Florida game as closely as everyone else. So like that's how all this information gets through there. So like that's a great point then, because when I'm looking at the spreadsheets that through Sports Source that they look through, and you just look at, okay, who are their common opponents, and you see that South Florida game, and you see the 2 scores, and they're both relative blowouts to the point where you're just kind of like, okay, whatever, just check. But like that nuance right there is the job of the schools and the conferences to really get that information through to the committee.
Yeah, and I think so I think if I could do it, and let's just be candid, we're always going to tell the truth here. Jim and I presented to the committee over the last handful of years with the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 was together, and it would be a version of Larry Scott or George Kliavkoff, Merton Hanks, and others on those staffs. And you go in, and Jim did a dramatic amount of the research, and then I did a large amount of the presenting, right? The commissioner would go, Merton Hanks would go, and then I would go. And you start to tell the story. You're positioning your conference, and you're, to your point, telling those stories, and most importantly, you're comping, right? You're trying to look ahead and be like, hey, this is who we might get jumped by. This is who I think we have to beat. This is the conference we're competing against. You're looking at all those things, and then you present your case. And we were very thorough, and I think all the feedback we got was that. So if it was me and I was a member, if I was like Bruce or Nicole Arbach or friends of the program here that are probably on those calls with the CFP chair afterwards, Ward Manuel, I would want to be interviewing the people at the conferences. I'd want to talk to them on like a Monday and be like, hey, so-and-so at the ACC, how are you positioning? Even if it's off the record. So, and I would be building that spreadsheet. This is what SEC says. This is what the ACC says. This is what the American says, and so on and so forth. Because now you're getting like their biased lenses, and then you start cross-referencing. That to me would be much better, because you're right. Jim and I, we would present to 2 people, and then those 2 people would present to 10 people, maybe, depending on who had to be kicked out of the room due to the
Right.
recusal element. And you don't know how much they're really sharing. And that is where I think a lot of this gets lost. And I still go back to like, will they choose the best body of work or the best available? And I think once you get into the 2 or 3 loss conversation, that is where it comes. That's where it comes. That's the Miami conversation versus the Alabama conversation. 1 loss, 2 loss, 2 loss, 3 loss. When we're looking at Ole Miss, etc. That is where like, I think I go old school of like, you lost. Like Indiana, they're in, dude. They're in. They lost on the road at Ohio State. It's 7-0. A punt goes off the face of the punter, and it's 14-0 at half. They return the opening punt for a touchdown. It's 21-0. Bam, kick off the third quarter. Saw the score. You're thinking they get drilled. Watch the game. Different context. So that's my head of the CFP. I'm glad neither one of us are agonizing over like a conference getting in or not,
Yeah.
which is nice.
Well, let's have the 0 loss conversation then.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go.
Oh,
because
okay,
we've got the Ducks in the title game here. So obviously you were up in Eugene at the early part of this week. So what's the vibe there with the Ducks?
Okay, so I just went on, and we'll have it on our social too. I just went on Kay Adams' show, and she's asking about like who should be coaching the NFL, and I say I think Pete Carroll should go coach. She said I love Pete. I know he still wants to continue to coach, and that like lit her up. And then she goes, "Well, you're just at Oregon. What about Dan Lanning?" And I was like, "I get it. Like aggressive connector, great DNA traits, all the stuff that he is, great communicator. I don't see that as an option for him right now. I think he's so happy, and clearly they're going on this amazing run here at Oregon. Point being, it's as healthy of an environment as I've been all year. I was there week 1. They almost lose to Idaho. And I was there yesterday or on Tuesday all day long and got to sit down with Dan, did a long feature with Dillon Gabriel, watched film with him, talked to Rob Mullins, their athletic director, Jimmy Stanton. Like you just kind of do the thing when you're there. You talk to everybody involved. And everybody said a version of the same thing, which is like, we are a really connected group. I sat down with Mateo Uyunglele, and I asked him a very poignant question. I said, last year you lost in the conference title game, and everybody picked you to be the winner. This team, there's members of this team, this core team that has been in multiple conference championship games. How are you using that experience for this one, your first year in the Big Ten? And he goes, a ton. He goes, this team is really bought into the idea of we trust one another, we lean on one another, and we know that to win, certain things just have to happen. And I thought it was a cool response because here we are on signing day. Here we are in the ultimate team sport that is rapidly becoming individualized. I make 10 million, I make 12 million, I make no million, and all of a sudden it's about the guy. And what Mateo referenced to me and Dillon echoed it and everybody echoed it in the building was that they still know that the old school traits that you need to win have to be there. You got to practice your ass off. They call it Bloody Tuesday, right? They still went all pads, right? You have to get to know one another. You have to be selfless. They have 9 players with 10 or more receptions this year. I talked to Dillon about it as we're watching film together that you'll be able to see Big Tens. I'm sure they'll put it on their channel and YouTube channel over the weekend. That's my takeaway. Is like all the things that allow teams to have success from your era and my era and any era exist amid a new era. And that's where the magic of Dan Lanning resides.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and not just because I want it to happen, through a bias, but I do think that Oregon is the better team, just from having watched every Oregon game this year, and by proxy a lot of Penn State games this year. I just think they're better. Now, does that mean that they will win? Who knows? You never know. Once you get into that environment, how that'll all play out. To me, I think what'll be fascinating is how the committee then, in turn, treats these teams. Should Penn State pull off the upset? Does Penn State then all of it, get, because then there'll be no, undefeated teams. Would Penn State then leap all the way to number 1 for having beaten Oregon in that? How will they treat that? And then where does Oregon go? Obviously, if Oregon loses, they're no longer a top 4 seed. So at best, they could be the 5th. It seems like Notre Dame is getting a lot of credit right now for what they've been doing since the Northern Illinois game, and almost forgetting that the Northern Illinois game existed. So it'll be interesting to see, would the Ducks then be a 5 or a 6, or how well they'll play out. And I think as we go through all of these games, I think all of this is interconnected, and that's kind of the fun of it, because I think there's a lot more interest in all of these games because of where all this will kind of fall out.
Yeah, I think a few things. If you ask me, what do I trust the most in college football? I trust the 2 teams playing in the Big Ten championship game the most, and then probably Boise State in terms of what do I know I'm going to get?
Gotcha.
Texas has been up and down consistently, right? To a degree. I think Notre Dame, on one hand, you're like, damn, Notre Dame, 1 loss. And then you start looking at who they played. Yeah. Okay. Look, they've done what they should do. But then I look at their last game against SC. It's a 1-score game. And the Trojans are driving, and they throw one of 2 straight picks for touchdowns in the red zone, the first one in the red zone. So I'm not oh my gosh. No, they're not at that level to me. Now, they run the ball well. They're kind of they're, to me, a little less talented version of Penn State in terms of really physical, going to run the football, going to do really good things, really well coached. You can see that Marcus Freeman being the head coach of the Bears. By the way, should have said that on Kay Adams' show. I'm just a huge fan of him. I think he's phenomenal. Like we got some really good faces in college football here. But you're right on that thing. If Oregon is to lose, obviously they'll host a game. What seed will it be? And I look at that thing and I say, well, what seed do you want to be? Like, do you want to be 5 or 6, pending what the other breakdown is going to be among those teams? I think that's a fair conversation. I know the committee doesn't want to do it, but I'm urging them, don't put conference opponents against one another or conference teams against one another. Like, just make it fun. Nobody wants to see, I don't want to see Ohio State, Indiana, or Penn State, Indiana, or Oregon, Indiana. Like, I want to see.
But we haven't seen Oregon, Indiana.
I know, but still, like, it's to me, it's like we are in the. Be careful here. We are in the argument of like conferences, which I think is like gonna get further and further removed the larger and larger conferences go. But while it's still a thing, I'd love to see other conferences travel. Like, I'd love to see the loser of the SEC championship game go to Eugene. Right? Or it probably wouldn't happen, but like Indiana go there or whatever it would be. Like, I'd just love to see that. I think that'll be great for the game. Like, think of the Alabama LSU SEC title game, and then they played again in the Natty, whatever, a decade ago. That was terrible. Like, who cares? You know, it's one of the lowest viewed championship games. Like, of course it is. You know, so I want to see that, and I also want to see the weather. Like, I want Notre Dame to have a home game. They will. I'd love to see, you know, clearly Penn State have a home game just because, like, can you imagine a whiteout on a Friday night with Alabama? It'd be freaking awesome, man. Like, that would be really cool. And one other element that I did learn, because I was like, hey, if you guys lose and you host a game, like, I kind of want to come up, and how do you get tickets? And it's all controlled by the NCAA. Now, they get paid I think it's like $3 million or something like that to like host the game. But it's not like it's an Oregon home game. Like, so I wonder, like, season ticket holders, like, I wonder how they'll do all that to make it feel like a home game. Do you remember back in the day with the Pac-12, what was that? Is that a different ticket?
Well, for the
like when like Arizona State hosted Stanford in the Pac-12 championship game. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, and I was on the network side, so it wasn't really intimately involved on that portion of like putting on the game. But I think there was still like a good portion like of the season tickets. I think they still like get respected in that level.
Good. Well, they'll be gone quick, and
yeah. Well, it'll be interesting. So let's say they do, like, Oregon does lose and they, you know, drop to the 5. Right now, that would theoretically be against the Big 12 champion, which, you know, you could get
amazing.
Arizona State at Oregon potentially. Now, obviously, Arizona State now is without Jordan Tyson
let's talk about that,
which is going to be rough. You know, I think the ASU offense has really relied on the big 3 of Leavitt, Tyson, and obviously Cam Scadaboo. The 3 of them have been amazing this year. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to to plug that in. And again, this is our plug to make sure Heisman voters, make sure you watch that game before you vote. You see what Cam Scadaboo does in that game. But it'll be interesting to see like how that all plays out. Like, let's say like ASU and Boise both win.
Yep.
Does ASU jump them, or does it still stay where it is? I could see both arguments depending on how that game actually plays out.
I agree. So I'm pulling up my my Heisman, how I vote, right? And I want to share this, and we can share it as however you'd like, Jim, because I do think it's important to talk about it, and then we'll get to the Big 12 preview. Number 1, I have 10 points on my scale. 1 is competitive dominance. Like, have you dominated in highly competitive moments? Cam Scadaboo, check. Power 5 filter. I don't care how you play against Mercer. I want to see how you've done. Power 4 filter it should be instead. 3rd, would I pay money to watch you play? I'd pay money to watch at least the guys I'm thinking about voting for: Tyler Warren, Cam Scadaboo, Travis Hunter, Dillon Gabriel, and Ashton Genty. 4, can you process? I think that's a big part of this thing. Like, I want a Heisman winner that I think will thrive in any setting, right? Including the next. And that's really probably quarterback centric. 5, it factor. Like, what kind of guy are you? To me, the it factor is defined as you walk into a room, people feel your presence, and you make them better. 6, injury factor. I think it's fair to bring into account, like Travis Hunter been banged up here and there. Like, should he get dinged for it? Not dramatically, but it's an element. Cam Scatterwood missed a game. Should he get dinged for it? It's a factor. I think there's something to that. Did you win your league? I value that, right? I really do. And I think that's clearly a knock against Colorado right now and Travis Hunter. And I just think it's fair. Now, they tied for first in the conference, so not as much, but it's a factor. 8, I go to the analytics, PFF, Sports Source, wherever you want to go. 9, this is a big one. This is, to me, community. I call it integrity. Like, what are you doing within your community? I'm not into you're just a professional athlete. Like, are you snubbing people after the game? How are you with kids? Like, what do you like in your community? Are you there just to play ball, or are you there to really be transformational within your school? Because if you win the award, you're going to be talked about with the school for pretty much the next 50 years.
Forever,
yeah. And then 10 is your performance on big stages. And I do 2 elements of that. I do a real-time grade and I watch it. And then this week I'm going back and watching all their big-time games, all their big stage games, just to see, what did Cam Scatterwood really do when the game was on the line? What did Travis Hunter do when the game was on the line? I don't care about a touchdown and blowout time. I want to know critical moments. 4th and 9, Dillon Gabriel against Wisconsin, coming off the field off a jump around. Find me a better throw, more pressure-packed throw in the country this year. You could argue, hey, Carson Beck had one that was pretty impressive a couple weeks ago in their game against, or I guess a long time ago in their game against Texas. So anyway, that's where I net out. We will be there next week. We'll have more on that next week. But for the voters, and you listen to this or watching this, I want to know, what is your process? Because it better not be I go to the straw poll and see what everybody else tells me to do. It's BS. Should lose your vote. 100%. And I am on this. I think that the 900 plus people, I know you honor your vote, but I think way too many have it. And if that means I lost mine because they were going to pare it down, okay. I just think it's too much. And I'll say this. I've talked to too many people in different regions that say, well, I always vote for a guy in my region, or I always vote for a guy in my conference. And I get that, but it's not a vote that's leading with integrity around the award. Like, I just don't think, I get it as a West Coast guy. Like, you always wanted to give a West Coast guy some love. I get that, but that's not what the award stands for. And now this year, we've got multiple players who are either on the West Coast, like Cam Ward, or have West Coast ties. Like Cam Ward. He's got the ties. And then we got a bunch of people that reside out here. And then the South has, I don't even know who they would argue is their biggest candidate. Maybe they'd say it's Cam Ward now versus Jalen Milroe, who I think fell off after the trip, if we want to call it that. So that's my Heisman thought. Let's get to the Big 12 championship game. You reference a potential Oregon-Arizona State matchup. Arizona State would have to win. What do you think about the job Kenny Dillingham has done and the matchup he has in Iowa State, who Matt Campbell has been rumored for a bunch of West Coast jobs over the course of the last couple of years? UW, USC, you name it.
Well, I mean, I think at this point, like, Kenny Dillingham has put himself right there with Curt Cignetti for National Coach of the Year award. I mean, I think it's those two at this point, just based on the way that everything has kind of gone out. I think Deion Sanders will be just a notch below that, with Kenny getting the advantage because they went to the champ game and Colorado did not. Now, granted, that's through tiebreakers, and I think ASU had to come further this year than Colorado did. Not a whole lot further. They both had to come a long way. But I think right now it's between the two of them, and I think I think Dan Lanning will get some respect for that as well. As not only one team went undefeated this year. There's something to that. But I think it'll be a really interesting game. But I'm really worried about how ASU's offense is going to continue to keep on that level without Jordan Tyson.
Yeah. Okay. So I've called an Iowa State game this season, and we know Arizona State as well as anybody. Marcus Arroyo, also one of the finalists for the Broyles Award as the top assistant. Marcus is a stud. We know how we feel about him here. Known him for a long time as young GAs when he was at Cal and I was at SC is when we first met. And now look at his career. I'm a huge fan of him and what he's about. I think going up against his defense, this is a really unique defense. They basically play with a center fielder. So imagine two safeties as both of my hands and my head being the third safety. and they just kind of hang, and they're in no man's land to a degree. Sometimes they're down in the box, sometimes they're a deep third, sometimes they're in the middle, taking away kind of like a intermediate route, if you will. And it's hard to decipher. To me, what I'll be watching in this game, and this is what I think Kansas did against Iowa State. Kansas beat them. Kansas is a running quarterback. Sam Levitt's a pretty good athlete, right? Quarterback for Arizona State. You've got to me, identify a player on your offense, a receiver or a tight end, and say, you are blocking that guy, that middle center fielder, if you will, because you have to account for him. And if you can do that and get a body on him every play, then he's not a free hitter. He's not somebody just running and creating havoc. He's not somebody that's confusing. Like, account for him. And if you can do that and have success early with the QB run game, you'll win. Okay, let's go back in history because we love history here. Do you remember when Utah had the best defense in college football since, I think, 1983? You probably do, because you were at that game. We were both there. It was freezing. The wind was ridiculous. And they were on their way to the CFP. They were playing Oregon in the final game in Levi Stadium. And what happened that night? What did Justin Herbert do that he didn't do all year?
Well, I was thinking that. Oh, that's true. I was thinking that was the game that Julian Blackman got injured, right?
Yeah. He ran the ball. Justin Herbert hadn't ran it all year long. It was a ton of zone read. Who was the offensive coordinator play caller? Marcus Royal. I anticipate, to your point, with the loss of Jordan Tyson and this unique defense, how do you get him out of this thing? How do you force that center fielder to play near the box and then start taking some shots? Not only do you hand it to Cam Scattaboo, but you run the ball with your QB as well. I will be watching those two things, QB run game and how are they accounting for that center fielder all game long. I love that it's the early game on Saturday. I'm going to be able to watch most of it in advance of our pregame show on the Big Ten Network because I'm going to be doing a 2 or 3 hour show with Ashley Adamson and company. It's going to be awesome. Jim will be there. But that is the key. That is the key to this game, folks. On the other side, Rocco Becht, really talented, really tough. These quarterbacks mirror each other in their athleticism, the mastery they have in their system. He's a really good college quarterback right now. They've got some talent on the outside. They want to run the football. I don't know if they're going to be able to put up enough points. I don't see them scoring 30 plus in this game. They've been on a little bit of a run, and a big Matt Campbell fan here. Love what he stands for, but I think I am leaning Dillingham, leaning Arroyo, regardless of the loss of Jordan Tyson, because I think that their scheme offensively is going to be able to have an answer for a defense that has given people fits for a decade. Like, it's been really hard to play this scheme. People have tried to copy it. I go to the Kansas film and I say, oh, they were all over it. And I think it's because they identified who was going to be responsible for that center field or that defensive player.
Yeah. All right. Well, real quick here, just because, to kind of just mention the other three champ games, or not that there's more, but these are the three kind of the most impactful ones. We got the Mountain West title game, number 20 UNLV, number 10 Boise State. The winner is in the playoff, which is, I think, one of the greatest parts of this expanded playoff. Like, this is a play-in game for this. So there will be more eyeballs on the Mountain West championship game than there have ever been due to this. And the loser is probably going to go to the LA Bowl hosted by Gronk. So, like, it's definitely, a wide chasm there, and how that goes. The SEC title game, you got number 5 Georgia, number 2 Texas. Obviously the winner of that game, I think, will be the number 2 seed, but if Oregon loses, maybe they would be the number 1 seed. We'll see. And then lastly, the ACC with number 17 Clemson and number 8 SMU. And based on that whole conversation from the front of the show, does SMU still get in if they lose?
I loved reading that take from many writers. I will be so curious to see what the committee decides. Because to me, off the cuff, you're like, no way, dude. Like, bring in South Carolina, bring in Alabama, bring in Miami. But when you look at how they've played and what they've done to teams, I mean, they drilled Cal. I get it. Fernando Mania wasn't playing, but Miami didn't. Miami went on the road. Cal went on the road. Like, they're but SMU took down Pitt. Like, you can start comping, and that's what they'll do. I don't know what I hope, but I'm a fan of chaos. Like, I'm a fan of, like, the Blue Bloods not getting in based on their rosters. I'm just not, dude. Like, if Texas, or let's just say if Georgia wins and Penn State wins, Georgia should not be the number 1 seed. They just shouldn't be. they should be the 2, if not even 3. We'll see how that thing ends up shaking out. Like, should Oregon be the 2 if it's a great game? Why not? You know, like,
no,
I mean, I know
you can't be,
but like, you see what I'm saying?
Number
like,
2, yeah. In the rankings, not in the seedings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that shakes out. It will be really curious to watch it. Okay. 2 other things real quick. One is it's signing day, and something that we are going to continue to keep an eye on and bring back to the top of our conversation in the next 2 weeks is Andrew Luck goes to Stanford. We haven't talked a lot about Stanford all season long. They've struggled all season long dramatically, and they've struggled for a couple years now.
I think it's 4 straight years of 3-9.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
They haven't beaten their rival Cal. Like, it just hasn't gone great. Andrew Luck comes in as their GM of football. And it's not the Matt Dudek GM. Jim knows what I'm talking about. Matt Dudek was the first GM in football. You could Google it, at Arizona under Rich Rodriguez. He didn't oversee the head coach. Not even close, right? He worked with the head coach. Right. Andrew Luck, we confirmed it last night, he does oversee everything, including Troy Taylor. Now, they're working in lockstep, and Andrew's probably going to be more business maybe than football. But in my experience, and I think in our experience, Jim, if you're a football person, like, you're in football conversations. Why would they not want Andrew Luck in those football conversations? And I loved what he said. He went on the Dan Patrick show yesterday or earlier this week and just referenced that, like, he still believes that you can achieve everything you want in college football at Stanford. You know what? And I agree with him. I think they're healthier than people think from the collective standpoint. They're competitive in that regard. They become competitive in that regard. I think they have a plan for the future. I think their plan is one because of the portal that can't happen overnight. And they have the one thing that very few schools can offer, which is the most elite degree on planet Earth in at least power football. And I think there's something there. So I go all the way back to one of my favorite TED Talks by David Shaw, the former head coach there, former player there. And he said, when it got going, when Jim Harbaugh got there and David Shaw got there, and now with Troy Taylor and Andrew Luck, they said, let's go get 25 elite players who are elite at school. There's 25 of those that exist in America. Now, you got to pay them. You got to compensate them. You got to do all the other things. And I just have a feeling that Stanford is now positioned with revenue sharing upcoming to be the best version of themselves in the coming years. Now, does the ACC help them in all these games that nobody really cares about? No, I don't think it does. I don't think anybody in that community gives a damn when they play Wake Forest. Like, I just think they're so accustomed to, like, the traditional games. And I think that's what the Pac-12 did for them. So who knows where they end up conference-wise. But overall, recruiting-wise, here we are on signing day week, I guess we could call it. Just start tracking it. Start tracking the Stanford movement. I think it's really notable. Andrew Luck is one of one when it comes to the person, the player, the personality, the integrity, the acumen. We're in an effort to make sure he comes on the show and we talk about that. So with that, we did effort. One of my close friends, guy I call family now, and it's not just Jim Thornby. No, it's today's guest, Rhett Lewis. Okay, Rhett Lewis played at Indiana. He knows all about the Rock. He's been tracking this story all year long. He's also been covering Big Ten football for as long as really he's been alive, right? He's been around football. He's loved Indiana. He's always been connected to that place. As a reference, he played there. He called games there. He's been a part of our crew this year on the Big Ten Network. He's got an incredible podcast titled BLeav in the Big Ten. He also is an expert host and analyst with the NFL. So he's got just a great lens on all things football. So we had to bring him on championship week to go deep dive into the championship game in the Big Ten Conference. So on behalf of our founding partner 76, who is always keeping you in the know on the go, we give you the top preview in America on the Big Ten title game with our very own second-time visitor, Rhett Lewis. Oh, yeah, the aforementioned partner.
Let's go.
Rhett Lewis. Hey, look, I know we're not calling a game this weekend, but we were not going to not talk.
No.
We were not going to not talk. I mean, I listened to you. Everybody should listen to it. BLeav in the Big Ten. Tom Hannafan and Rhett Lewis. They give you all the great insights. You said a really tough interview with Joe Klatt. You know I love you, man.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk Big Ten Champ Game. But you know we're not going to not talk about the season we just had. And we're not going to not talk about Indiana and defending the Rock.
Of course.
So how are you? How are you?
Well, As we sit here and assess where we're at, it is a new life experience for me to sit here and say that my alma mater is a lock for the college football playoff, which they are, Yogi. They're a lock. Like it's, I don't know where they're going to end up. A home game, maybe one more chance to defend the Rock would be awesome. Seems maybe a little unlikely at this point, but it was an awesome finish to the season. I mean, like the reports and the texts that I got from people who were at the Snow Globe game in Bloomington, Indiana, 66-0. Everyone stayed till the end to celebrate with the old Oaken Bucket. I think of 6-year seniors like Mike Kadick up front, the starting center who's been through it all at IU and earned this opportunity. And those are the guys and the people who've been around that program forever that I really think about in these moments when the regular season has come to end and it was historic. And now we know that there's still a lot of work to be done.
There is a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
So where do you net out on Indiana and like where they might go? Are you like go to Penn State or go to Eugene if it's like the loser of the Big Ten championship game? Or do you like want to go somewhere warm and a team you don't know? Like, do you not give a damn? Like,
yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think when you look at teams that they could end up facing, and obviously we'll get the final, CFP rankings, on Sunday after everything is all settled on conference championship week. But, I think about the teams that are out there that have all had losses to teams that they probably should have beaten. And I think that gives you a pathway to victory if you're, let's say, if you're Indiana and you go and you end up having to play Georgia. Like, well, I mean, shoot, Georgia Tech took them to the mat. Sure, it was a rivalry game and 8 OTs and all that nonsense, but they've let teams hang around. Notre Dame, I mean, Northern Illinois took them down. Like there's faults, I feel like, with every team. And so I just don't feel like there's this overwhelming juggernaut, with the exception of perhaps the team that resides in the city that you are in right now, Yogi, with the Oregon Ducks, which we'll get to here. But I feel like every team is beatable out there, and they've shown that, and they've put that on their resumes. And I think sometimes we're losing sight of quote unquote bad losses when we're talking about resumes in the CFP.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you get quiet and you're like, okay, what was on the film?
Yeah.
And you look at what Indiana has done to everyone who's been on the field with them, even including to me the Ohio State game. Like I know what the final score was, but I don't think they can't play with a team like that, even if they got matched up against Ohio State.
They need to play better for sure.
Agreed.
Right? I mean, like that's without question. Ohio State deserved to win that game, but there were moments, throughout where Indiana certainly belonged on that field. And I think that's what you kind of take stock of, and that's what you hold on to as you go into a playoff, with, blue blood programs everywhere that you're bound to line up against.
Yeah, and that's the playoff. I guess I don't feel like they're Cincinnati. And I think they're getting put in that bucket to a certain degree of like, because they haven't done it in so long. So, I'm sure they won't need any motivation. No. With that said, let's just rewind a little bit. Like what was your year like with us? Like it deserves a little bit of afterglow love here on our season together. We did 14 weeks together in college football.
We did, man. It was a blast. And it far exceeded any expectation that I had placed upon it. I kind of went into this thing, not really knowing, never really having done sideline games before. As I mentioned, I did one back in 2010. And it was probably so bad that it took 14 years to do another one. So, and so I was very anxious. Certainly a little nervous, but in a good way, right? Not really knowing how it was going to play out but the thing that I can say that was an overriding factor was the support and the advocacy by my two mates in the booth, man. You and Guy went above and beyond to, make me a vital piece of the broadcast. And I don't think that happens everywhere else and on every crew, and certainly not naive to that. So I truly, have a ton of gratitude for you guys, for our producer, Denny, our director, Pat, and really BTN for being, open to maybe something a little bit different, right? Down on the sideline. Cause like I said, my previous experience in game broadcasts has been as, play-by-play or as an analyst, more so on the play-by-play side. And so to do, kind of like a 50-50 sideline traditional analyst, kind of probably talking a little bit too long into other plays. So having to call a little play-by-play every now and then was appreciated, and it was a lot of fun. And I hope we gave our viewers, just a little bit of something that they can now associate with our crew and the way that we call games.
Yeah, I think it's something that we proved to be entertaining. I heard from a lot of producers throughout the season. They were like, man, I love how you guys all ride with one another. Yeah. And I think that was it's a really selfless group, man. It starts with, at the top, obviously at the Big Ten, and then all the way throughout our crew. And of course, you and Guy. I had so much fun. Like, it was just so much fun. Like Guy would say, roll out the red carpet and punch him in the ribs because I was so jacked. You would say something dope, and I'd be like, let's go, Rhett. Like, it was just one of those. It was cool.
Yeah, I had a blast, and man, I wish we were still going, but we'll get our chance to continue to rap about ball as we go forward here for sure.
Okay, so let's keep doing that. And what's cool about this episode, this is like a home and home, right? So you can listen to this on
the
Big Ten. You can listen to this on Y Option. I've wanted to do this with you all year. I'm glad we get to do it in the postseason. So
collab, baby.
Here we go in the collab. So before we get to the game, right, which is the Big Ten championship game, you have such a pedigree in the NFL, right? Like, I love every week I'd say, Rhett, who's getting evaluated in the NFL from every team? You would know. And the NFL, to a degree, is cutthroat. I'd say to a large degree is cutthroat. And maybe it just is cutthroat. Here we are in college football. It's signing day this week. The portal opens up next week. I just want to I'm going to reflect it on myself. I'm like, am I too sensitive to all this stuff sometimes? Because our previous episode, I went off about the portal and where I think it sits. So for you, like, with the NFL background you have, I'm kind of curious, like, when you see quarterbacks who've been 2-year starters and team captains dip after success, or when you see, coaches leave after success, like, when you see that stuff that is just kind of like old hat in the NFL, like, you get cut, you get traded, you resign. Daniel Jones, moving on. Like, is there something that we all can take from you on how to navigate the collegiality that we all want to lean into?
I think what happens is you build a callus, and you kind of just, for better or worse, Yogi, and I'm really not sure which it is you build I don't know if I want to say a tolerance, but you build, a little bit of grit on your way of thinking when it comes to that. It's like, okay, this is part of the business. Saquon Barkley is, not getting what he feels like he deserves in New York. And so he's going to go down to their bitter division rival and is going to be his best self in Philly. And kind of like, well, great for Philly. Giants probably had their opportunity. They felt like they wanted to do something different, thought they could, be a better team, a better composed team in a different way. And I think you just got to kind of, take it for what it is and just, it's like the no crying over spilled milk. It's just like it's hard to sit here and lament things that are already happening, because you just kind of move on. Like, that's kind of the way that the NFL has taught me to approach this transactional lifestyle, and that's what college football has become. And it's more and more like the NFL, and college football programs, as I'm sure you've talked about, are more and more looking like the NFL. Personnel directors here, general managers here, scouting directors here. You've got your pro personnel directors in the NFL. You've got your college scouting directors where, you've got some guys looking at, the best talent in the league right now that we can go find next year. And then you've got a different group of guys going to look at the best talent in college and try to put that forward. That's what's happening in college football. You've got essentially your pro personnel, guys who are looking at college players right now. And then you've got your high school recruiting team who's going out there and trying to find the best and brightest on that front. I just think it's so alike now. And it's going to get even more alike with revenue share happening, that I just don't know if we can be mad about it anymore. Like, that's where we're at. Like, this is where it's at. It's not going back. We're not getting rid of the transfer portal. We're not getting rid of the money. Are there ways we could tweak it to make it better and more palatable for everyone involved? Probably so. I don't know if I'm smart enough to figure that part out. Hopefully there are people out there that can. But I know the one thing that really needs to be changed is where we sit with the deadlines on everything and the dates. And I think everyone can kind of agree that portal opening while teams are in the playoff is just it's insanity. I mean, you wouldn't have free agency in the middle of the NFL playoffs. So there's definitely some things that can be worked out to make it better, but I just don't know what getting upset about it all really even does for anyone anymore. It's where we're at.
Yeah. We could talk about that forever. Maybe we will in the off season. My biggest issue is like, I wonder if, and it's probably true that like the best top tier quarterbacks in the NFL, when they're going to decide to re-sign or sign somewhere, they're going to have a list of demands.
Yeah.
Fair?
Yeah, of course.
I hear that happening in college now.
Yeah,
and that's to
tough.
me like the part where I'm just like, Aaron Rodgers is one thing, somebody else is another, and that's where I just rub the wrong way. And I think your counterpoint is so good.
Yeah.
But what everybody forgets is like school starts. Like I talked to a quarterback last night, and the coach he was going to just left or got fired or whatever, and he's trying to navigate where do you go, and it's like, well, school starts January 4th.
Yeah, like, you got to figure that out. That's the part about the dates, right?
Agency.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way,
school is still a thing here, right? Despite all the money being passed around. I think the one thing about all this that I still have a hard time with is the idea of, you got to be careful with how you say it, but giving up on your teammates in a way where, things aren't going well for you in the landscape of a season, and you're going to step away from the team to preserve your individual prospects moving forward. That part for me is still a little hard to stomach, knowing, the era in which we played in, Yogi, you would have never considered that. Right. Yeah. I mean, you just would have never considered that. So that part of, but again, that's where we're at. Right. And so it's kind of just, you got to come around to it one way or another.
I like it. Don't cry over spilled milk. It's like my kids say, you got to brush your teeth, whether you like it or not. Dude. So we do it the easy way or the hard way. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. One way or another, it's getting done.
Yeah. It's getting done. Okay. Chip Kelly always says this line that I love, which is no crying on the yacht. Right. So we got a yacht in Indy this weekend. We got two top 5 matchup, Penn State, Oregon. One loss, Penn State, of course, at home to Ohio State. Oregon wins a beautiful game at home against Ohio State. So you have a common opponent. You played them at least in your own place to a certain degree. Yep. When you net out at this game, like, where do you begin? Like, how do you figure this one out?
All about protecting the quarterbacks on both sides, and who can do that the best, to me, will have the best chance to win, because both of these defenses can get after your what. Right. And Oregon, obviously, franchise program best, 10 sacks this last week against Washington. Jordan Birch comes back as 2.5 as part of that. I think that's another thing to watch is Penn State's a little banged up on the offensive front, right? Right tackle Danko out, and, they're putting Rucci in there, and, can he continue to try to find some continuity there for the Nittany Lions offensive front? But man, you look at where Oregon's getting healthier, it felt like, right? I know they've had some missing pieces and some moving parts along the offensive line as well, but you get your most explosive player on offense back in Tez Johnson. He catches a touchdown in the season finale, and you get Jordan Birch back and is a major factor up front getting after the quarterback. Not to mention, you can throw waves of pass rush personnel at Penn State. Right, Tuioti, Uiagalelei, bring it from the second level with Bassa and Betcher. Bring it with Derek Harmon up front. Like, man, that scares me for Penn State. Now, look, I think Penn State with Abdul Carter and his 10 sacks and the crew that Tom Allen can deploy, right from whether that's extra rushers, bringing pressure that way from the second level, or just the guys up front getting after it. I think Dillon Gabriel's got to be on high alert here, getting the ball out of his hands quickly. Let's let Tez go make some plays, that sort of thing. I truly feel like that's where this game is going to be decided. Up front, protecting your quarterbacks on both sides. Who does it better? I think will have a great shot to win.
This stat surprised me. I'm going to go sit down with Dillon Gabriel after our show here again. Home and home, right? BLeav in the Big Ten, NY option. And we had their opener, the Oregon Ducks. And then you look at their second game. They gave up 7 sacks in those first 2 games.
Yeah, it was bad.
You know how many the rest of the season they've allowed?
What is it?
Right here, Doug. 5.
Wow. They found a good combo.
That was a late night in the hotel deep dive for me. And I was just like, wow. wow, now part of that is moving the pocket. Part of that is the legs of Dillon Gabriel. But part of that is, to your point, this offensive line. And you're right. They're going to see an intricate pass rush. Zane Durant, you referenced Abdul Carter. Like, this is a really gifted front seven for Penn State. I go to the point of, like, if Oregon can jump on Penn State, I don't know if they're built. I know they can score, and they can score in bunches. And when they can lean on you, take away a possession or two, run the ball, give Ty Warren the variety of plays that he'll have. I don't know if Penn State's built, if they're down 2 scores, to take chunk plays in that regard against this defense, against this team, because I think they can run with them. I'm curious, where do you net out with that?
That's a good one. I think I would agree with you on that front, because this is not a downfield passing attack with Penn State. It's a creative one, right, that finds a lot of different ways to get Tyler Warren, one of the best players in college football, his touches and his opportunities to impact the game. But this team is built from the backfield out. Right. It's built with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, and then Tyler Warren also involved in that run game too, which again makes him one of the most versatile threats in ball. But that's what I look at there, is that, this is more of a ball control type of offense than a push the ball, explosive plays, down the field. That's just something that Penn State hasn't had from their wide receiver group really all year long. And I think that's been one of the things that you kind of been concerned with. And then who do you feel better about when a pocket is collapsing to either make a play to get away from trouble or stand tall, deliver the ball quickly in the face of pressure? I think Drew Allar's gotten better on that front than we saw from him a year ago, but I still think Dillon Gabriel gives you the best chance to get out of trouble. And that's the other thing that I've watched with the last, half of the season for Oregon, is he's found a way to get into the end zone on the ground using his athleticism in almost every game. And I think that's just another piece and another layer to Oregon's attack that Penn State has to deal with, and that Penn State doesn't necessarily have with their offense. Not to say that Aller, isn't athletic and can't move the ball, move around with it, but I think Gabriel's got the edge there. But remember, the first few weeks of the season with Oregon too, now they weren't finding the explosive plays. They weren't getting the blocking down the field, getting bodies on bodies downfield to allow, those 5-6 yard, connections or quick throws out to Tez to go for, 50 or 60. They weren't getting that. And I got a little bit better as the season went on. But can Penn State continue? Can they, find a way to not let those quick throws go for chunk plays? I think will be another piece of this to watch.
I keep thinking back in my mind's eye of Penn State at the Rose Bowl, whether it was the SC game or the Utah game or at the Fiesta Bowl against Washington, all games that I covered back in the day. And I think they have this way where, like, you look at them and you're like, the speed of the opponent, the explosiveness of the opponent. And then you forget, like, they can fly too. Like, it's not like they're slow and they're downtrodden and they're stuck in the mud. And they're such a physical outfit. They practice so physically. Like, I wonder for you, like, do you see this game? I know you referenced the how do you protect, but do you see this being like your classic, if you want to call it a classic, like the Michigan, Ohio State type of game? Do you see this a low scoring affair? Or do you see this like more like the Minnesota Penn State game, or more so like, I guess, Oregon, Ohio State, at least some more points than less than 20 per team?
I feel like it's going to be closer to, I would say it's less Michigan, Ohio State. It's more Penn State, Minnesota, and probably gets closer to Oregon, Ohio State. Does that make sense? Like, I could definitely see this thing being like a 30-27, a 30-24, maybe 31-30. I could certainly see that. I just think, like, what's, the two things that I also come back to in terms of, offensively is, all right, what's Andy Kotelnicki got left in the bag for Tyler Warren, right? Like, what are the ways in which that we have not seen that he can find a way to impact the game that way? And then I think the same thing for Will Stein with Tez and with Trayshawn Holden and with Evan Stewart. because I don't know that they've had a game where all three of those guys have really had a chance to eat. It's been like, yeah, we've had an Evan Stewart game here. We've certainly had the Tez Johnson games when he's been healthy. That's been more of the consistency part of it through the pass game. But what we also really haven't had is the Terrence Ferguson game. And I know he's had a couple where, he's impacted the stat sheet, quite a bit, but I think there's so much there for him. And how does Penn State deal with that? So like there's so many, ultimately when it comes down to it, Yogi, I think pathways to victory is always something that comes up for me. And I think Oregon can win the game on the ground with Jordan James and Noah Whittington. And I think they can win the game through the air with Tez and with, the other receivers and with Terrence Ferguson. So ultimately, the way I lean is Oregon putting up points because they've got more avenues to find that production than I think Penn State does. I think it's Penn State. It's you're going to rush for 200 yards or you're going to get Tyler Warren for $150. And if you can pull one of those things under control, if you're Oregon, you're going to have a much better shot and a much clearer path to victory.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You go back and study, and I'm like, how is Tyler Warren always getting the ball? Because I'm like, everybody knows they want to find ways to get, you got to stop him. But to your point from Andy Kotelnicki, like just the creativity and finding matchups is going to be really fun. So I want to go to that at the end here.
Yeah.
Coaching.
Yeah.
I do think that for Penn State, look at the fake punt against Minnesota, Oregon, whether you want to go 12 men on the field and the lore around that, you want to go with the punt formation against Michigan. I mean, there's a bunch of examples.
Fake field goal at Wisconsin, right?
Yep. Yeah. So away we go, right? There's a bunch, and he's not afraid to go for it.
Yeah.
Where do you net out on this game? Like if you were calling it, would you be like Penn State needs to be the aggressor, try to steal a possession? Is it Oregon? This is just who they are because they can trust their team can handle the dark side of when it doesn't work. Like you referenced on that fake field goal.
Yeah.
Where do you go there?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I just, there's something about, Dan Lanning and, and I know you know him even better than I do, having spent some time around him just this year, getting ready for that Idaho game week 1. There's a confidence there in this team. And he mentioned it in his press conference this weekend, talking about the Big Ten championship game and that they talk about connected, being a connected team. It's one of the DNA traits. We've talked about that a lot. And I know you have as well. But he feels like this is the most connected team. And I think when you feel that way about your group, it allows this confidence and aggressiveness to take its shape on the field. And it unlocks probably some inhibition in a coach to go out there and make those types of aggressive play calls, whether that is, a fake on special teams, whether it's going for it on 4th and 1 at your own 35, just trusting in your guys to go ahead and get that yard, deep in your own territory, or understanding that, I got a damn good defense. And if we don't get it, I got great confidence that we're going to either limit them to 3 or we're going to get the ball back one way or another. So I think that with Dan, the way that he has brought this program up since he's been there gives him that confidence to be aggressive. Whereas with Penn State, I feel like in a way it's become a necessity because of the way that they play. And they don't have necessarily as much in the explosive front to change the game and to capture a game that way, that maybe there is a more of a pressure to find an edge here. Now, look, I feel like I'm painting a picture, whereas Penn State is, this is a lopsided game in terms of talent. That's not the case, right? I mean, Penn State is one of the most talented teams in the country and has every opportunity to beat Oregon, on a level playing field here. But I do feel like in this type of game, knowing where James Franklin has come from in big games before, whether that's a Michigan game or an Ohio State game in recent years, I don't think he's going to be afraid to pull all the punches in a game like this, where really they have nothing to lose, right? I mean, no one expected them, even going into this week, to be into the Big Ten championship game, much less playing for an opportunity to win it. And they're already in the playoff, regardless, win or lose. So I think you're going to see a lot of stuff come out on both sides. But I think more so, I think from the Penn State side, because we maybe just don't expect it as much based off what we see.
Yeah, it's going to be a hell of a game. Both teams very capable of not only winning this, but of course winning the whole thing. I think they're two of the more trusted teams in the country. I don't know what I'm more excited about, Rhett, is the championship game this weekend, seeing you and hanging out with you in person, or a home game for either Penn State or Oregon, whoever loses in the first round. Like, all things equal, they're all amazing. I net out. I'd rather hang out with you. Thank you for hanging out with me today.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, man. I look, a CFP game at Autzen, like, come on. Like, that's and like same for Happy Valley. Like, if it's a night game, could they pull off a whiteout again? You know, like how sweet would that be in the CFP? Man, forward to, and I know there's a lot of arguing back and forth about who's in and who's out. But you know what? When it comes down to it on December 8th, I think we're going to figure out, who's in and who's out, and we're all going to be pretty dang excited about the matchups that are there to come.
Yeah, and we know Indiana is in.
Let's go.
Let's go, indeed. There it is. Rhett Lewis, thank you so much for sharing your platform. Again, BLeav in the Big Ten, Y option, a nice little partnership, right? This is like our Big Ten championship, man.
This is
Just get to share the field with another tremendous human being. And I love your show and everything you guys are doing there. So thank you, man. And I'm sure we'll be texting soon.
Yeah, let's go, man.
It's the Afterglow. Yogi Roth, Jim Thornby. That was Rhett Lewis on behalf of our founding partner, 76. And what was really cool about this episode is you can listen to it at Y Option, which hopefully you are right now. Also at BLeav in the Big Ten. Rhett Lewis and Tom Hannafan. They do multiple episodes every week. And we decided to do a little home and home. So they share it. We share it. Jim and I talk about it before and after. Rhett and Tom talk about it before and after. So check out them if you want Big Ten content all year long. They are my go-to source in that regard. Jim, your takeaway from our go-to guy in Rhett Lewis.
Well, it's great. I mean, like, how rewarding must it be for him to his first season, back working in the Big Ten, to have his alma mater have the season that it did. I know, like, it was after the fact that we taped the interview that Curt Cignetti was named the coach of the year. So, like, it's really cool for him. And I thought that, just the passion that brings. I mean, obviously, with the two of us having worked in the Pac-12 the previous 12 years, like, that's kind of in our blood, and the Big Ten is in his blood, and now it's kind of seeping into your blood a little bit here. So it's like cool for you guys to have like a passionate conversation about that.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite humans. He might be the most talented person I've ever worked with because he can do play-by-play, he can do color, he can do sideline, he can do features, he can do the NFL, he can do college. His dad was a trainer. We talked about it the first time he was in an episode. He was a trainer in the NFL for over 30 years. He's been on this show now twice, so go back and listen to that if you want to learn more about who Rhett Lewis is. But just aces on every level, in at least through our eyes and our lens here. I think there's one other thing I want to touch upon, Jim, is that we saw you reference Curt Cignetti, Coach of the Year. There's a lot of arguments around what's up with Oregon. They didn't get a lot of votes. I want to just take everybody through this. And I believe this in the Pac-12. I believe this now in the Big Ten. The Big Ten now, it's not 10 teams, as we all know, right? Coaches are voting. And I can remember sitting in the room at USC when we would vote on postseason awards. And you'd go around the room and you'd talk to your coordinators, some other people on your staff, and you say, who's the best O-lineman we face? Who's the best edge rusher? Who's the top receiver? And so on and so forth. Oftentimes, you are voting through your lens of who you've seen. 18 teams, right, in the Big Ten?
Yeah.
Okay.
800, right? No.
9 conference games, right? So you're not seeing basically half the league, right? You might see them in crossover film, but I just think there's something to that. Like if you, and they don't make these votes public of like who voted for who. I think they should. Why not? It'd be just kind of entertaining. Like,
no, trust me.
Jim hates
as someone who, I don't hate it, but as someone who tabulated all those votes for the Pac-12 the last 4 years, let's just say, like, I'm not gonna throw anybody under the bus here, but occasionally there will be a vote where your eyeballs will be like, oh, whoa. And I'll because they're anonymous, and I will leave it at that.
Well, here we sit on signing day, right? And like, we'd be ignorant if we didn't say like coaches are always competing and always positioning.
1,000%.
That's just it. Now, I do think that coaches across the league want every player to get their flowers. I think like they're all mature enough to know. And I could say that knowing all of them in the Big Ten in my first year and a bunch, obviously, over the past, 20 years from the guys on the West Coast. my point is that, like, I think for fans, like, you can light up a league oftentimes and think you're getting screwed oftentimes. But really, if you try to be thoughtful about it, you're like, well, half the coaches didn't see our team. Yeah. It's just the reality. And I think the votes that come from coaches, they're often coming through their lens. And there's a ton of talent. Like, look at running back in this league. Like, let's just talk about the Big Ten. Woody Marks, Caleb Johnson, Kyle Monangai, Darius Taylor. I mean, you can go up and down. Jordan James. Like, there's really talent. Go to the Ohio State and Penn State. They got 2 on each team. Like, they've got NFL next level backs. Like, how do you vote? How do you pick a guy or 3 guys? Like, I like that they have a lot of slots compared to at least what we used to have in the Pac-12. Like, I appreciate that in terms of, like, more players are getting some shine because they should. But it's just hard. And I think that you end up voting. If we were allowed behind the curtain, I would bet that the vote is based on who you played. Now, the Coach of the Year thing is different. I think that there's a world where you look at Curt Cignetti and you're like, holy crap. Like, he took this thing over, brought a bunch of players from lower level in football and won big. And you could argue, I hear it, they didn't play anybody. Look what Dan Lanning has done. You've heard me say it many times. Going undefeated is much more challenging than going through with 1 loss. Well, Indiana was undefeated up until the second last week of the season. And I do think it's okay, just like it is at quarterback, to have 2 guys that are really good and be 1 and 2 in the draft. It's okay to have a couple coaches be really good in hell of a seasons. Dan Lanning, Kenny Dillingham, Curt Cignetti. Like, everybody won't win the award. But I think let's just all take a breath on, like, how frustrated we might get to A, know the landscape of how you vote, and then B, know that there's a lot of good people doing really good things in college football. When you have 18 teams, it's hard to really say, like, this is a home run.
And I'll say to that point, I think that's where it's warranted to have a coaches team and a media team, because they're going to come through it from 2 different lenses. Because, like, I saw, like, our friend or James Crepia of Oregon, like, he was crushing the voting, and, like, he had a point about all of it. Like, all of it, it was all 100% true. Like, it was like, why is Oregon the undefeated team and they're getting way fewer, people on there? And if the media is voting for it, they're going to have a completely different look at it, because, to your point, like, coaches are voting for who they saw, who, obviously they're watching film of all these other teams that, and they're seeing it as their job, but that's not what their focus is. They're not, like, watching film in October and going, like, oh, I'm going to make sure to vote for him as the, first team offensive lineman in the Big Ten. Like, that's not where their focus is at. That's right. But I think to have those 2 different ones, because you're going to get different results, and you're going to get, like, that dude, if that dude ran for 200 yards against me, he's getting the first team vote for me, right, regardless of what he did in all the other games.
No doubt. Like, I think of D lineman. I'm like, all right, Derek Harmon. Yeah. I think of Mason Graham. I think of Jay Toia. They're all really talented players. They all can't get, like, the first team spot at nose tackle. So just some thoughtful context coming from the lens of the West Coast. It is signing day. Congrats to those players. Get your hat on, commit, and stay. Look at Jim, committed to this new CFP. Look at you. At least for another year. Maybe we'll go to 14 after that. Who knows? We're out of here. We will see you from Indy. Stay locked on the social media. Stay locked at yoption.com. Jim is going to be there. Rest your thumbs, Jim, because your smartphone's going to be doing a lot of work, right? To our editors back here on the West Coast, you'll be doing a lot of work. I'll be doing as much work as Jim tells me to do, but I'll also be on the pregame show. So check that out on Big Ten Network. And then we'll be covering the whole thing, all post game, throughout the next day and throughout the postseason, because the postseason is officially upon us. Big thanks to 76 and Rhett Lewis, and of course, Jim and our team at Y Option. Lots of love. Stay safe, and congrats on whatever hat you may have chosen.